Well, let's go ahead and get rolling for this evening. My name is Andrew Felton. I work with the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. And tonight we are proud to present our weed wrangling presentation. So this workshop is a relatively new offering for us. And so we're really looking forward to y'all seeing it and providing any feedback that you might have along the way. Before we get started, I do want to start tonight out with a poll. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll right now. And what we're really hoping to hear is what weeds you're having trouble with out there. We have a couple of common options out there: ivy, blackberry, holly, the ones that everyone sees out and about. And then also an answer for other. So if you have any other weeds, please feel free to go ahead and include that in the chat. You'll see an icon for chat at the very bottom of your screen there, and you can easily just add it to the queue, and we can save it and answer some questions about those specific weeds at the end of tonight's program. While you're all answering, I'll just go over a couple of housekeeping items. As many of you have already heard as you've entered or had joined us already, we are recording tonight's presentation, and we will be adding it to our YouTube channel later this week. Everyone who has signed up for the presentation will have access to that recording, so don't feel like you have to scribble every little note down today. You will be able to go back and reference it in the near future. We'll also be sending up a follow-up email with the slides of this presentation, as well as a link to that recording. So you will have it at your every beck and call if you so choose. As I mentioned, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat icon. I'll be on the other end of that tonight. So if you have any technical difficulties, or if you want to reach out with any other weeds that you might be having trouble with, feel free to enter it in there. And you'll also see a Q&A button. At the very end of tonight's presentation, we'll have a chance to ask our panel of experts any questions that you might have, and we can kind of dive deeper into any specific weeds that you're having trouble with at that point. And then finally, at the end of the presentation tonight, you will see a prompt to complete a survey. If you wouldn't mind just taking a few moments to fill out that survey, it is a big help for us in providing these webinars, especially this one, since it is a relatively new one that we're offering, so we can kind of tailor make it for everyone as we're going through. Now, just to quickly go over the format, I'm going to present a little bit about what our organization is, the Tualatin SWCD. We'll then hand it over to our presenters, and then, as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the very end. So let's go ahead and close out our poll, and we'll see kind of what weeds everyone's having trouble with out there. So I'm going to go ahead and share the results so you all can see that. So as you can see, there's a lot of different weeds out there. Everyone has trouble with ivy, blackberry, and holly, and there's even many others out there that folks are seeing. And I didn't see any in the chat, so I can't call any of those out, but we can dive deeper into those later on in tonight's presentation.
Andrew, I see in the Q&A, somebody says that the chat seems to be disabled.
Oh, look at that. Let me see if I can't fix that for everyone. All right. Now I think people might be able to try it. Give it a shot now and see if someone wants to be. Hey, there we go. So it looks like it's working. So we have a periwinkle out there. I'm sure we'll see Herb Robert out there. Another grassy weeds in our lawn. Great. Well, thank you for catching that. I'm glad we're able to take a look. Nipplewort is another one. Bindweed, all kinds of stuff coming through. So as you can tell out there in the virtual world, everyone is dealing with weeds, and many of them have different types. So tonight's presentation will be able to dive deeper on how you can treat weeds of any type. So let's dive on in. So as I mentioned, I work for the Tualatin Soil and Water Conservation District. We are one of 45 conservation districts in the state of Oregon. What's really neat about conservation district is there's one for every county across the U.S. So what I like to encourage people to do is, whether you live in Washington County or whether you live in any other county, look up your conservation district, because they have many programs similar to the ones that we have. Now, what we do is we work with residents like yourself to help enhance our natural resources. And we do that through a variety of ways. We can do that through technical assistance. So we help folks take care of the weeds they might be dealing with. We help folks if they're having any issues with erosion, if they're hoping to plant rain gardens, things along those lines. We also have financial assistance programs, so we can actually pay for qualifying projects, and we can talk a little bit more about that after the presentation. And we also offer education programs like the webinar that you're in this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our panel of experts, one of which you've already heard from, and they can introduce themselves for this evening. So Tyler, you want to take us away?
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome everyone. Thanks for attending tonight's workshop. We're looking forward to kind of walking you through the process of how to deal with your weeds. My name is Tyler Pedersen. I'm the Invasive Species Program Coordinator at the Tualatin SWCD, and I've been here about just over 5 years now.
My name is Olivia Hurd. I'm an invasive species technician at the Tualatin SWCD, and I've been here almost 5 years now.
And my name is Eli Staggs. I am also an invasive species technician here at the district with about 2.5 years working for the district.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of get us started off here. Just kind of giving you just a general overview of our invasive species program, some of the services that we provide. We do a lot of work with landowners on providing advice on controlling common weeds. So this is kind of like the workshop that we're giving tonight. And then we also give a lot of technical assistance, site visits, and email, phone calls. We also do a lot of survey and control of what we call early detection and rapid response, or EDRR for short, weeds and pests throughout the Tualatin River watershed. We have a tool library of weed wrenches that we will loan out to landowners free of charge, and those weed wrenches will help remove invasive trees or shrubs like Scotch broom, holly, or English hawthorn. And then we provide these weed watcher workshops or weed wrangling workshops for communities like we're doing tonight. So the workshop goals, these are 3 of the goals that of the workshops that we're going to be covering tonight. Getting a better understanding of botany basics, just getting you more comfortable with some of the terminology and the different growth forms of the different weeds that you might be dealing with. Then we're going to be learning the process of weed wrangling. And then lastly, we're going to do some highlights of a few common weeds and how to manage them. All right, now we're going to get down to botany basics. So getting you familiar with the different life cycles of the weeds that you are trying to control. And there are 3 different life cycles. The first one being annuals. And so these are plants that will complete their life cycle over the course of 1 year. They produce flowers and seeds very quickly. So that's their main way that they spread is by seeds. So you'll see a lot of them producing plentiful amounts of seed. The summer annuals will complete their life cycle during the spring and the summer. And then what we call winter annuals will complete their life cycle during the fall and the winter. The next life cycle for certain weeds that you might be dealing with are biennials. And these plants require 2 years to complete their life cycle. The biennials usually take longer to produce flowers and seeds. During the first season, the plants will produce leaves and roots. And then during the second season, plants will overwinter and then produce flowers, fruit, and seeds. The last life cycle are what we call perennials. And these plants will live more than 2 years. They often have very robust root systems. That's where they draw their energy from to produce seeds, regrow if you don't happen to get all the roots out. The herbaceous perennials have soft stems that die back each winter with new stems that will regrow in the spring. The woody perennials, like trees and shrubs, have woody stems that withstand cold winter temperatures. So those are the 3 different life cycles of weeds that you might be dealing with. And then these are the different ways in which weeds can grow and spread. The first one being seeds. So seeds can spread by wind, water, animals, and humans. They can be short-lived or long-lasting in the soil. For example, long-lasting, probably the most long-lasting seeds that I know of are the Scotch broom, which can last up to 80 years in the soil. Pretty amazing. Stolons, these are structures that usually run along the ground to form new plants. Many will creep along quickly, and then others will take more time to develop. Rhizomes, these are continuously growing underground roots. They grow horizontally and they start new plants, and they can be shallow or deep, short or long. So what exactly is a weed? We have many different terms to when we talk about weeds. This is any plant that grows in an unwanted place, especially in gardens or fields where it prevents desired plants from growing. So that's just kind of a general term. But then we have many other terms that we use that can often get pretty confusing. So the first term, these are native plants. So these are plants that historically occurred in a place. They're also called indigenous. So these are the good plants that we find on our landscape. For instance, Oregon grape, that's a native plant. That's our state flower. It's good for pollinators, good for providing habitat. Non-native plants. So these are plants that have not historically existed in a place, but have been introduced due to human activity. So non-native plants might not necessarily be invasive plants, but they are not from this area and they were likely introduced in some way by human activity. Invasive plants. So these are non-native plants that spreads rapidly and harms humans, the environment, or the economy. So these are a lot of plants that do a lot of damage. They could be harmful to humans because they're toxic. They could be harmful to the environment because they can limit the spread of other plants, of native plants, so limit the growth of native plants, cause bank erosion because they don't have very robust root systems. And then the economy, a lot of these weeds, like tansy, they can impact pasture health, livestock health, because they're very toxic. So those are a few examples. And then lastly, we have noxious. So these are plants designated by federal, state, or local government agencies as harmful to public health, agriculture, recreation, wildlife, or property. So these are plants specifically identified and listed by federal, state agencies. So usually there's, like in our case in Oregon, we have, a noxious weed grants. There are funding sources available to entities for controlling these listed species because of the damage that they can do to our environment and our economy. Okay, this is a great graphic. This just kind of shows how invasive species can wreak havoc by damaging habitat, biodiversity, and infrastructure. So you can see at the far left how we have a healthy ecosystem, and as we go to the right, you're starting to see invasive species starting to spread and take over. The one that you see that's coming up in the wetland and along the road that looks like woody knotweed, which is something that we won't talk about today, but it's something that we talk about when we're discussing early detection rapid response plants. And these can spread rapidly and they can take over, and that's why it's really important to get on them early on so that they don't spread and cause damage to habitat, to property, and biodiversity.
All right. Thank you, Tyler, for giving us such a good background on some of the
the terminology and botany basics we want to have in our back pocket while we explore our management strategy or our weed wrangling process or our weed wrangling strategy. This is a strategy that our invasives program uses ourselves when we try to control invasive plants. We have 3 steps that we follow, and these are steps that we recommend you all follow when trying to identify and control SD plant species that are growing on your properties. And so these 3 stages are broken up into discovering your why, as simple as asking yourself the question of why do I want to control this? What are the concerns that I'm experiencing on my property? What are the expectations that I have for controlling? At the very beginning, before I research or learn anything about this plant, what is it that I hope to accomplish? And what are my tolerance thresholds? This will be something that I'll be explaining in later slides, but how much of a plant could you accept if eradication maybe wasn't an option? After discovering your why, you'll move into the research part of this strategy where you're trying to learn and gather as much information as you possibly could about the particular species of concern, because all of that information is going to then lead you into taking action. All of that information is going to inform you about what plan you can take, and it might even bring you back to your original expectations, and it might change your mind about how you originally thought you were going to control that plant or how effective of a treatment strategy you might have. So to break down the discover why, the main questions you want to ask yourself when looking at a plant and discerning whether or not you want to maintain or remove this plant from your property, you want to ask things like, is this weed toxic to the animals that I'm raising? Maybe I am raising livestock and I have a plant like tansy ragwort on my property, which is toxic to livestock. So that becomes a priority for removal. Or is it dangerous to my family or pets? Or is there a weed that exudes a toxic sap or an inedible berry that if a curious eater grabbed one, they might become ill or endanger themselves from eating that plant? Does it crowd out other plants you want to keep? Are you raising a garden and some of this weed is getting in the way from you of having as productive of a harvest later on in the year? And like I mentioned, tolerance thresholds are an important concept we wanted to bring up in this presentation, because what the tolerance threshold is a maximum presence of a weed you can put up with. This is going to be different for everybody, different for different plants and scenarios. There are some plants where you can have an absolutely 0 tolerance threshold, something that could endanger your pets or family, something that has a toxic berry. You don't want it on your property because the risk it runs to having a negative impact on your loved ones. Or there could be weeds that you look at them and you say, you know, I'd rather it not be here, but it's not doing too much harm. How much could I really put up with it? How much effort do I want to exert into having complete eradication? Examining your tolerance threshold is important for later on when you're ready to develop your action plan. And so these expectations derived from that tolerance threshold and your concerns, you want to look into how much effort are you going to have to put into controlling this plant? How much time will it take? And do you have the resources available yourself in that moment to control the plant? You might learn when asking yourself, how much of each of these 3 line items you're willing to exert into controlling this plant. And so after discovering your why, you've realized, okay, I do want to get rid of this plant. It's time to research. And identifying the plant first and foremost is the most important step. It is the doorway into unlocking all of the other information that you could acquire about this plant. So you want to get a correct identity, get a good common name, get a scientific name of that plant, and learn what its name is, learn what the research out there refers to that plant as. You want to determine its life cycle and how it spreads, because a plant's life cycle will decide when and how often you might be trying to control that plant. And then you'll also want to determine its uses and impacts. And we bring this up because weeds and plants often have, they have uses and they have their impacts. A good example would be blackberry. Blackberry plants create really dense thickets. They outcompete native vegetation. It is a weed, and it is a plant that is more often than not desired in the places they're growing. However, we all love to eat blackberries. They're very tasty. They're sweet. When you're walking down the sidewalk and you can have a snack, it's great. So it does have a use. And being able to balance the pros and the cons, the uses and the impacts might change your opinion, or it might fortify your opinion of keeping the plant on your property. And then during your research, you want to identify all the treatment methods that it responds to. You might have gone in with expectations of just hand pulling a plant, but then through research, you find out that hand pulling isn't the best solution, and it isn't the best way to go. Or you go in and you think that I'm just going to take some chemical and try to use chemical. There are oftentimes a lot of research out there on how plants respond to different treat methods, and there's a lot of information on which is the most optimal method to treat that plant. And so taking the time to research is a very important step. And so when you're ready to identify your plant, you want to learn the common and scientific name. Like I was saying, these are the key pieces of information that unlock the door for all the other necessary components you want to gather. And so listed here are some resources that can help you identify the plant. You can take photos of them and compare them to resources online. And another important question when plant identification, you want to know if the plant has any lookalikes, because there are a lot of weeds, a lot of native plants that look like each other. And if you were working quickly or didn't take the time to look these up, you might run into a situation where you're confusing the identity of two different plants as the same one. And if you want to target a weed, you don't want to accidentally get rid of desirable vegetation like a native species or a food crop that you're growing, or an ornamental species that you have in your landscaping. Next is determining its life cycle and spread. When you're looking up the life cycle, if a plant produces flowers and seeds quickly, this will inform you that you need to be very poignant, or be very precise on your timeline, making sure that you're staying up and watching the life cycle of this plant, keeping track of when it's going to flower, because if it sets seed, then you are going to slow down your timeline of eradication, because like Tyler was mentioning, some plants can set seed and those seeds will last in the soil for a year, 2, 5, 10, 20, up to 80 years. So being on top of when a plant flowers and when it produces seeds can make a huge difference on how soon you might have that plant eradicated off your property. Learning if a plant is a perennial, you'll learn that maybe it has very robust root systems, which hold on to a ton of energy, and it's going to take a little bit more elbow grease and a little bit more energy to actually physically get it out of the ground, or have it respond to any of your other chosen treatment methods. And learning how this plant spreads can also inform, if you're going to be needing to remove all root material or just the top growth. All of these, again, inform how you choose to control the plant later on. And so we are going to go through just some uses and impacts that go hand in hand, just to clarify what we mean and give you an image of what some uses and impacts of different species, different plants there are. Does the plant produce berries? Sometimes those berries taste good, but sometimes those berries are edible, but they are not edible because they are toxic. It has an impact. Another one would be, does this plant attract pollinators? We know that pollinators are having a hard time, and sometimes having food sources for our pollinators can be a good thing. But does it also attract pests? because we don't want to have a weed or an invasive species growing that is going to provide shelter for other pests that we don't want to have on our property on top of the weed issue we're dealing with already. Sometimes a plant could fit in with your landscaping. Does that necessarily mean you have to remove the plant because it kind of goes well, it looks nice? Or when it is growing amongst your property, does it take over wherever it is present? It's removing all of those other desirable species that you're hoping to keep. Another use of a plant that you might be identifying as a weed, sometimes those plants could provide forage for your livestock. But then there are other times where you're recognizing that this plant is restricting good positive forage for your livestock. And then another use and impact are our neighbors. Does this plant benefit our neighbors? Does it provide a privacy screen between myself and my neighbor, and so we can both enjoy the privacy of our own home? Or is this plant impacting my neighbor because it's growing into their space, and I want to be considerate and make sure that I don't have something taking over someone else's landscape? And then finally, you can look at your treatment options. And when you're researching treatment options, things that you want to keep in mind is how much effort it's going to take to actually engage in that treatment. You know, if you have a very large infestation, sometimes that means that you're going to need to ask for help, or you're going to need to implement different tools. You couldn't possibly hand pull an entire 10-acre patch of a particular plant. Sometimes you might need to till, or you might need to mow it. So depending on the size of the infestation, you might have different choices on how you approach that plant. And sometimes you will learn that with the type of removal that the plant needs, you might learn that that plant has a vigorous taproot, and if you just mow the above top growth, then the plant has plenty of energy, plenty of life down below ground to just resprout again. So researching the removal will tell you if you need to remove the entire plant, or just the flower, or just the top growth. Next, you will want to consider time, because if you have a plant with a zero tolerance threshold, you might be feeling the pressure to remove this plant as soon as possible. So you want to think about what treatment methods you could employ with having faster results, or realizing that all the treatment options available are slow. They're going to take a while. You'll have to exert some patience, some fortitude of mind to wait for the final result. And so your expectations of quick eradication might change. And then also a big one, like I was mentioning earlier, is how long do those plants, the seeds last? Because if you have an infestation of a weed where the seeds last for up to 10 years, well, unfortunately, we're going to be signed up for 10 years of maintenance. You might be able to knock out the bulk of the infestation, but it'll require you to continue monitoring for the near future until you don't see any of that plant returning. And then finally, treatment options, you're going to be looking at the resources required to enact those treatment options. Sometimes they will require tools or equipment that you may or may not have. And sometimes that, again, like the size of the infestation, there might be help you can ask for from your neighbors, or is there someone that can help you? Are there avenues for getting technical assistance, maybe from a soil and water conservation district, to inform you on effective treatment methods, or maybe help you help guide your plan? So thinking about the resources when researching your treatment options is very, very important. And so these treatment options are going to look like an integrated pest management strategy. This is an infographic that shows the IPM pyramid, which is all of the tools in your toolbox that you can use to control the weed that you are concerned about. And first, to start, is preventing the plant from spreading or being introduced to your property in the first place. You might be aware of weeds that you don't want to enter, so you can do things to keep them out. Or if you have an infestation of a weed on one corner of your lot, but you don't want it to get anywhere else, there are ways to keep that weed or that pest from spreading. And some examples of this are using boot brushes anytime you walk through an infested area, cleaning your clothes and your equipment off of any potential seeds so you're not moving them around on your site. Researching before you buy or plant a specific species is always good, because you might grab something from the nursery or from a neighbor, or oftentimes maybe a independent retailer online, or somebody that and they hand you a species, and it's important that you also double check and make sure that the plant that's being sold is what you're after, and that it isn't something that's going to end up biting you in the butt later by spreading like crazy. And then two others important things about prevention, because we're going to plug this, is just to not move firewood or dump your aquariums, because weeds are not the only pests that we deal with in our world. There are a lot of insects and diseases that transport through firewood. So if you buy it where you burn it. And then also a lot of our aquatic ecosystems are under threat from invasive animals that were once held as aquarium pets. And when people are finished with their pets, they sometimes dispose of those in our natural waterways, and there are avenues for properly disposing of your aquarium pets. Next is cultural, and cultural is intentionally manipulating the environment in which that plant grows. So you're trying to, you want to intentionally manipulate it so that the plant cannot grow. You're doing things like cover cropping. You're planting bare areas with desirable vegetation so that any weeds don't get introduced, because nature hates a vacuum, and if there's empty space, something's going to get it, and these ultra competitive invasive or weedy species will often be the first ones to grab them. So cover cropping is an effective cultural tool, or using fire when appropriate. This can be a useful tool to manage weeds by upping the heat, because a lot of the times those young growths, the cotyledons or the seeds, can't handle that heat. Using grazing or sheet mulching are also effective cultural controls of manipulating that environment. Next, we have manual. This is hand pulling, digging with tools, mowing and plowing, a whole array of different ways that you can put a little muscle into removing these weeds. And that would also include using a weed wrench, which, to plug our program, we do have weed wrenches available for free to Washington County community members. We have a whole library of weed wrenches that we rent out throughout the year. They're popular items, so feel free to reach out to us if you have holly trees, hawthorns, woody, weedy shrubs. Weed wrenches are great tools to get rid of those. And then also one other manual control effort that you could implement is deadheading, which is removing the flowers of a plant before they get the chance to set seed. This might be a tool that you use to buy yourself some time, or it could just be a way to stop an annual plant from having a new generation. Biological is another component of the integrated pest management toolbox that we have. Biological controls are taking the weedy species when they come to Oregon or Washington County, and if they're from another part of the world, the checks and balances that plant had in its native environment didn't travel with it, and so when it's here, it's allowed to just proliferate out of control. But what researchers do are find a checks and balance, maybe a pest like a bug, or oftentimes it's a bug that is brought back to the United States and only targets that weedy species. And so this biological control is a really effective tool, especially for tansy ragwort, where the cinnabar moths will attack the tansy ragwort and reduce its populations. If you're interested about what biological controls are available and what is already existing out there, we recommend you consult your local extension office to find out what information they have about the presence and activity of biological controls for the species that you're interested in. I do want to emphasize that biological controls are used to reduce infestations. Their final goal is not to achieve eradication, because if we think about if I were that bug and I ate all my food, I eradicated the population, then I'm left with nothing to eat, and that's kind of a bummer. So in the bugs, in that biological controls perspective, it's in their best interest to keep some around. And what that achieves is, rather than having a weed or an invasive species be the dominant cover of a landscape, suddenly it becomes a much smaller footprint on that landscape. And some years are going to be better than others for biological control. And finally, we have chemical control as part of the integrated pest management toolkit. We want to just recognize that chemicals are a useful tool. They can help achieve, some plants don't respond to a lot of treatment methods. And in the case of a particularly invasive non-native species, woody knotweed, chemical is the only control method that we are aware of for removing it. So we like to include it. We like to emphasize that anytime you do choose to use a chemical, you research what you're using before. And we want to start with the least toxic product, because oftentimes some only provide short-term control, and more toxic products should be used as a last resort and only when needed. And oftentimes, if you get to that point, we'd recommend you give us a phone call and we can talk about what's happening, because oftentimes those toxic products can have off-target impacts, and they might have restrictions on when and where you can apply those products. So it's important to get as much information as you can from chemicals before applying them. We want to emphasize that you should always read the label, because the label is the law. Everything in there about how and when you should apply it is a legal requirement. And we want you to wear personal protective equipment like gloves and eye covers and long sleeves, long pants and covered shoes when you're applying these chemical products. And so finally, after all of this research, you can take action. You want to revisit those expectations, take what you learned from the research, and ask yourself, from maybe the uses and the impacts, do I really need full eradication? Or, you know what, I found out more than I knew, and I really ought to get rid of this plant. You might revisit that expectation of eradication. You'll learn a lot about how long that management will take, what your timeline is going to be, and whether or not you will need outside help. And so after revisiting your expectations, you can develop your plan by identifying the treatment methods you need to employ, determine those best times to treat, and you can create a timeline and maybe even find a friend, find out who you can call for assistance. And Olivia, I'm going to be passing it off because she's going to help us develop some plans for some common weedy species. But first, Andrew.
But first, we have a pop quiz for you. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the quiz now. And it's a very short quiz, just going over a lot of what Eli and Tyler have already spoken to today. So it's just 4 quick questions that should be on your screen now. If you wouldn't mind taking our pop quiz and indulging us a bit. It's not graded. We'll kind of take a quick look at the results so we get the answers. But the first question of that is, what is the foundation of the IPM pyramid? So that's the pyramid that Eli had described earlier. Is it prevention, cultural, manual, biological, or chemical? The second question is a description question. Feel free to go ahead and start answering these as you're out there. This is a herbaceous plant that flowers in the summer and then it dies back in the winter, and then new growth returns in the spring. What kind of life cycle does it have? Is it an annual, a biennial, or a perennial? This question is, what is the order of our weed wrangling practice or weed management? Is it discover, research, take action? Is it take action, research, discover? Or is it research, discover, and take action? And then finally, the question, it's a true or false question of all weeds require chemical control. If you want to just take another minute or two to answer any of those questions that you might have, we will close the quiz in just a moment or two here. All right, see question or answers filtering in, which is amazing. Thank you all for doing that for us. Go ahead and get your last responses in. And I'm going to end the poll in just a couple of seconds. Looks like we have most folks have answered. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and we can take a look at what those results are going to be. So the foundation of the IPM pyramid is indeed prevention. It's always the best way to go is preventing a species from gaining a foothold in an area. That species that it's describing right there, where a plant flowers in the summer, then it dies back in the winter and returns in the spring, is a perennial. The order of weed wrangling is, in fact, discover, research, and take action. And then finally, all weeds do not require chemical control. Some certain situations, definitely chemical are a good option for, but not every weed needs that practice. Great. Well, thank you all for answering those questions for us. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Olivia that will walk us through the practice that you might go through in trying to treat some of our common weeds.
Sounds great, Andrew. Thank you. Okay, the first weed that we are going to talk about is ivy. I know many of you have probably seen ivy out in the landscape and know how aggressive it can be. So talking about ivy, we're going to first discover why, we're first going to figure out what the species is, then we're going to discover why, and then in our research, we know that it's ivy. It has a perennial life cycle. How it spreads is by seed, stem, and root fragments. It blooms in the fall, and it has impact to humans and livestock. It increases the risk of wildfire, it reduces biodiversity, and threatens priority species. So you can learn all of this by going to our weed and pest directory, which was included in the email today, and we will also send it out at the end. And we have a very large list of species in our weed and pest directory, and we are continually adding additional species to it. So here's our ivy page where we can learn all about ivy and learn about the different pieces of information that will help us come up with a plan for treating ivy. Gives you a little bit of information, how it spreads, the habitats it lives in, some impacts, and what you can do about it. Some additional lookalikes, some more information, and you can also get a BMP from here. So from here, we are going to look at that worksheet that we were talking about. So here we are discovering why, and now we are looking at the research. So from that weed and pest directory entry, we now know English ivy, the scientific name is Helix hendra. It is a perennial. It blooms in late summer, early fall. It spreads by seeds and stem and root fragments. Talked about those impacts that it can have. And here's some treatment strategies. So for cultural, planting or seeding with native vegetation once you've eradicated the ivy. And when you should do this planting is for seed, October to November, and December to March for planting. So those woody species like snowberry and some of the other native plants, you would want to do the planting from December to March when we've got lots of rain to help them get established. For manual, hand pulling ground ivy is pretty easy, especially during those wetter months, so October to April. And the tree ivy, if you cut it about 4 feet off the ground and then pull it back away from the tree and cut it at the ground level, then all that tree ivy up in the high up in the canopy will die back. We don't recommend pulling anything above that 4-foot level because it can have an impact on the tree, and you could dislodge branches that could fall on you. And it can get pretty dangerous if you start pulling on those trees. The chemical options, you can foliar spray with a backpack sprayer or do cut stump spray. And that cut stump would be on those large tree ivy vines that you see. You'd cut them out of the tree down to the ground level, and then you just treat just those little stumps that you see. And you do this October to March when it's trying to send all of its energy down into its roots. I know that seems counterintuitive, but for ivy, that is the time period of the year that it responds best. So on this worksheet that you were sent on the first page, the discovering why, what are your long-term goals, are there site concerns, and then you can map out your site that you're looking at. And then it goes into that research. And then on the last page, take action. So here we're looking at a weed management calendar for ivy. You can include your other species on here as well, so you can set yourself up for a plan for the year. So planting those native plants and seeding. So planting in December through March, seeding in the October-November timeframe. You're going to hand pull your ivy in those rainy months. So October, November, December, January, February, March, and April, when the ground is still wet, and makes it easier to pull up. And then you cut stump from October through March, and you can spray that ivy that same time of year. So this is just repeating what we talked about before, but after you fully eradicated, you can replant with native plants to help fill in those spaces and outcompete any ivy that may come back. But you will want to keep on top of it, just in case little roots have remained in the soil. For ivy, pulling should be done in those wetter months. And then herbicide treatment is best done when native plants are dormant in the fall or winter. This allows for little to no off-target damage. And if there are no existing natives nearby, spray work can be performed outside of that window. So this is kind of an easy way to walk through this worksheet. You've all been sent that worksheet, so you can look at it online, and it was all sent to you, so you can use this to help plan out your time frame. And there's also links on here at the bottom. You can contact us. There's also a link back to that weed and pest directory, and back on the weed and pest directory page, you can use this to help you come up with a timeline for treating ivy. Let's find the BMP on here. So here's our ivy BMP, or best management practice. So it kind of repeats some of that same information on the web page. This is an easy to print out version of it. It has a little bit more detail on it. And on the last page here, we kind of have that calendar for you. And we're working on putting together the calendar for each of these species, every species that's in our weed and pest directory, so that it can give you a time frame for the best time of years to do treatment or hand pull, just those different methods to help you control it that are listed here. It gives you kind of a timeline to follow for removing them. So let's go back to our presentation here. So for ivy, we kind of talked about those different treatment options, so I won't repeat it for you, but it will be in the presentation for you to look at again. And that timeline, so sometimes it's talking with your neighbor is part of that, so that you can help your neighbors get it under control, because it might be affecting your property. The next species we're going to talk about is blackberry. So that ivy species, we went in pretty depth to show you the worksheet. This one, we're not going to show you the worksheet, but you kind of have an idea of how you can use that worksheet. We will show you some of those same tips on here, but the blackberry, we won't go in quite as much detail, but you can find all that same information on our weed and pest directory. For blackberry, so blackberry is Himalayan blackberry, Rubus armeniacus. It is a perennial. Its bloom period is April to August. It spreads by seeds and rhizomes. Its impacts, it increases the risk of wildfire. It can reduce biodiversity, and it threatens some of our priority habitats. So for that blackberry treatment, there are cultural options. So if you're removing blackberry, don't delay in replanting because it can take over. So getting some plants in the ground pretty quickly after you've removed it can help you keep it under control. You can also use goats for grazing. It's effective over several years. You just got to keep on top of it because goats will reduce all the leaf and some of the younger stems, but they won't eat those big, huge, older stems. So that's just something to keep in mind. For manual, you'll want to check the area for nesting birds before removing that blackberry. There are certain periods of the year where it is not recommended for cutting blackberry. You can cut the blackberry above the ground, those canes, with a trimmer or a mower. And once the canes have been removed, you can dig up the root crowns with a shovel. And then you can monitor the site for several years to remove any additional canes that emerge from the ground. Sometimes it's hard to get that whole corm or root mass out. And so if a little piece breaks off, sometimes it will regrow. So just keep that in mind, that you'll have to keep following up on the site. For chemical, you would also mow down the canes and then wait till they're about 1 to 2 feet tall before doing any herbicide treatment. And we recommend doing the cutting first because it reduces the amount of herbicide you're using. And if there are any natives that have been hiding underneath your big blackberry bushes, then it'll allow you to see those so that you can avoid treating them as well. Give you a little bit of leg up in repopulating the area with native plants. So here's the treatment calendar for blackberries. So talking with your neighbors can happen any time of year. Goat grazing can also happen any time of year. Just staying on top of it. Replanting with those native plants. Includes the seeding, so it's kind of November through March. For those mowing and trimming of the canes, it's best done August through March, and we don't recommend the April through July time period because that's when most of our native birds are building nests, and they often like to build nests in those big berms of blackberry just because it's a little bit more protected from some of the critters that might get into their nests. You can also dig the root crowns October through March. This is best done during those wet seasons because it makes the ground a little bit softer and easier to work with. After there, we can do the chemical. If you do have desirable plants nearby, it's best to do that herbicide treatment November through February. And if there are no desirable plants nearby, then you could do it as early as August, but you can continue all the way through that February time period. So the last species we're going to talk about tonight is holly, but don't despair. A lot of this information is on our website, and we are happy to talk with individuals if you reach out to us to talk about different treatment options for their specific property. So our last species is holly. So holly, also known as English holly or Ilex aquifolium, it is a perennial. Its bloom period is May to June. It spreads from seeds and root and tree fragments. So if you lay a holly branch on the ground, sometimes those branches will root into the ground. So it's just one more way that holly branches can get spread. Its impacts, it is toxic to humans and livestock. Those berries are toxic to humans and livestock. It reduces biodiversity. It can also increase the risk of wildfire. And those holly berries, they have a long-lasting seed. And so just 1 year of allowing the plant to go to seed, those seeds can last in the soil for many years to come. For holly, some treatment options for cultural is, before choosing to plant English holly, consider a native alternative. So if you like the look of the holly leaves, an alternative would be Oregon grape. It has similar leaves. They've got those sharp spines. They're evergreen. They don't grow quite as tall as holly, but they do a good job if you're looking for a barrier to keep people out or something along those lines. It does still have the sharp prickly leaves, and it does have some nice purpley berries that the birds love. For manual, small plants can be hand pulled or removed with a weed wrench. Here you can see Eli removing a holly with a weed wrench. And we do have weed wrenches available. I know we've talked about this before, but just reach out to us. We are happy to loan those out to Washington County residents. We have a form on our website that you fill out, and it's easy to get that tool picked up from our office. You'll want to monitor these sites for several years and remove any new root suckers. So those roots can send up additional plants. So just keep an eye on your property. And larger trees can be cut down and the stump sprayed to reduce the resprouting. Doesn't require a ton of herbicide, so it's pretty easy, and it's a very localized treatment. So if you're worried about it traveling to other areas, it is a very localized treatment that can be done pretty easily. So for holly treatment, you can plant native plants after you've removed the holly from November through March, if you're looking for those woody species. You can hand pull from October to March, just looking at those kind of wetter months. Also, the weed wrench works best during those wetter months, just to make the soil softer and just a little bit easier, that it doesn't just break off. Helps any time of year. You can help and remove those root suckers. Usually they're pretty easy to pull out of the ground. And then that cut stump treatment is best done September through March. Before those, I guess, kind of during the time period when those berries have set seed, so that it's sending all of its energy down into its roots, so that it actually kills off the entire tree. So here's that weed management worksheet that we've been talking about, and that we walked you through the discover why, the research, and take action. So here's what the worksheet looks like. You guys all should have received a copy of this worksheet before the presentation. It does have our contact information at the bottom of it if you want to get in contact with us. And we're happy to walk you through this worksheet again. And you'll also have this presentation to refer back to help you fill out this worksheet. Yeah. Hopefully this will help you come up with a plan for your property. And you can include all the species that you want on here, or you can have this worksheet filled out for each species that you have on your property. Here's some additional resources. So that weed and pest directory is available at the bottom of the worksheet, but here's some other resources that are available to you. The OSU extension Solve Pest Problems. They've got some good additional information. The National Pesticide Information Center, also known as NPIC, is currently housed at Oregon State University, and they can talk to you about any herbicide. They're a great resource. We've used them. Many of our contractors have used them, and they're a great resource if you want to know about specific herbicides or the impacts that can have on humans or pets. They're a great resource. If you're looking for some of those native plants to replant your property with, the Metro Native Plants for Willamette Valley Yards booklet that's available online is a great resource. It can also help you find plants to replace those invasives. And then Grow Safe, Grow Smart is a good resource if you're looking for some of those low impact herbicides or insecticides or pesticides out there. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Andrew.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Olivia, Eli, and Tyler. So what are your next steps? Now that you've been prepared to go weed wrangling on your own, your next step is to head outside and walk around your space, and start taking note of what weeds you might have, and refer back to both this presentation and the worksheet that we've talked a little bit about today to develop your own plan. I also want to kind of give a shout out to many of the weeds that we talked about today are more of the common weed variety. We do have our spring presentations, which dive deeper into priority invasive species in our watershed. So these are going to be the knotweed that you heard about a little bit, garlic mustard, hogweed, some of those more serious plants. And we offer a workshop each spring called Weed Watchers that helps folks identify those and then be able to report them. So our panel of experts can go out and do that treatment themselves. We don't have the dates yet for our spring 2024 workshops, but if you stay tuned, we will make an announcement usually around the end of January or so, give or take. And now we come to our question part of it. So if you have any questions for our experts, please feel free to go ahead and use that Q&A. I will go ahead and read those out as they come in. I saw one came in, so if you want to keep on adding some in, we did get one at the beginning during our registration, so I'm going to start with that one. And I'm going to start off with Olivia this evening. So Olivia, the question that we received was, will leaving dandelions crowd out and outcompete other seeds or seedlings that may be trying to grow in an area? Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you.
All
This
good.
is a great question. Depending on what you're looking for in your landscape, can change the answer to that question. So are you trying to encourage those seedlings in the area that this dandelion is, or are you okay with a few dandelions living in an area? Maybe you don't want that dandelion in your grass, but you have an area that you kind of have some native plants, the dandelion, some other plants that you're okay having for pollinators. That might be an area that it's okay for that dandelion to live. So it just depends on what the goals are for that property that you have this dandelion in, or what section of this dandelion is on your property.
Great. Yeah, it all goes back to those expectations, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right, we have another question in from our Q&A, and I'm going to hand this one over to Eli. So, Eli, what is the best method for identifying what the name of a weed is? This person has a wide variety of weeds, and they're not familiar with how they can go about identifying it.
Yeah, so I will give you two best methods. One for if you want to be a do-it-yourselfer, or if you would like to get an answer from either Olivia, Tyler, or I. I would say that one method you could do is if you have a wide variety of plants on your property that you want to identify, we are a great resource to contact. You can take photos of your plants, you could send photos to us, and we would be more than happy to identify those plants for you. If you would like to go into the do-it-yourself realm, there are some applications on our phones that we can take photos of plants, and it will use fancy computer magic to pop up a corresponding plant. Some of those apps include, I think it's Identify from iNaturalist. Am I getting that right, Tyler and Olivia? Andrew, Identify is through iNaturalist?
Yep, I believe
Yep.
so, yeah.
Yeah, so iNaturalist is a massive database of species observations, and they created an application where you can take a photo and it will churn out a result of what it thinks that plant is. I will say you might want to double check that against some other searches. But I think one of the best ways Vicky, is for you to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to identify any weeds that you might have.
And I think that other website was I think Planet Snap also has an app, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's actually listed on the resources.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so PlantNet is the app that we have
Got it.
found to be the most accurate. And all the apps that we've used over the last 4 or 5 years, we found that PlantNet, the A in plant is an @ so that helps identify it in the App Store, but we have found that it is the most accurate results for plants. So you're welcome to download that, but we are also happy to help you identify those plants.
And I'll also include that PlantNet app in the follow-up email, so you can have a direct link to their resources and their website. Another question that came in that I'll pass over to Tyler. Tyler, is there any hope of getting rid of a field bindweed in a yard with bees and chickens?
Yeah, that's a good question, Sarah. I think with field bindweed, that is a difficult one to get rid of. If you have a large infestation, I would say, yeah, it can be very difficult. If you got a small to moderate sized infestation, you can try to do some manual or hand removal, but you got to be really diligent about it, and just keep monitoring and getting any resprouts, because it will take off, especially as we get further into the growing season and spring and into the summer. Of course, then it'll start flowering, and then you'll have bees visiting it more often, and you want to try to limit disturbance and try to do work outside of that window before it flowers. But yeah, it can be challenging if you're just looking to do it without the use of herbicides. But it is manageable if you have a small enough area and you can really keep an eye on it and monitor it, and pull out any resprouts, because it can, like I said, it can grow really fast, and you're just kind of trying to get to it before it just explodes, once the temperatures warm up, and then you've got it flowering, and then it'll just, kind of take over and engulf part of your yard. So yeah, I would say definitely just try to keep on it if you can with doing manual removal. And then if you are interested in, doing some kind of herbicide treatment, you can do that, but you just have to be careful, like I said, with with the pollinators, trying to get to it before it flowers, and before the bees are active. And then, yeah, if you've got an area where your chickens are using the yard and you need to kind of, there's any way to kind of like keep them out of an area that has it. If you do want to spray it, that would be an option. But if not, you can pull it up, and then what you want to do when you remove it is, you want to make sure to kind of put it in a trash bag and put it in the trash, and not compost it, because it can resprout if you put it in your compost heap. But yeah, that would be my recommendations. But happy to follow up with you afterward if you have any other questions too.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tyler. I don't have, excuse me, I don't have any more questions in our Q&A, so I'll give it another couple seconds. Oh, and just like that. What about mock strawberry? So Olivia, I'll pass this one over to you. So what about mock strawberry? Just manually pull it out. They couldn't find that one in our weed and pest directory.
I don't believe this one is in our weed and pest directory yet. But I have actually just recently been dealing with this last year in my yard. And I did do manual removal, and they do come out pretty easily. They do have those roots that spread out and continue to reroot down the stem. So keeping that in mind, but they do pull out really easily, especially as the soil is damp. You can even just water the area. That made it pretty easy for me to pull them out, because it was in a garden bed area I didn't want it mixing with my actual strawberries. So I would recommend manual. If you have it covering a huge area where you don't have other plants, you could use herbicide, but it is a plant that is pretty easy to pull. Yeah.
Great.
And for disposing of it, I would recommend putting it in your trash, or sending it to one of the big composting facilities. Like if you have a yard debris bin, that would be okay, because those typically get hot enough. For that mock strawberry, there are certain species that don't recommend sending there, such as the corms of blackberry or ivy or holly, because sometimes they don't get ground up fine enough or get hot enough for those sorts of species. But for this mock strawberry, it doesn't take a lot to kill them off. So it would be a species that would be okay to go into your green waste bin.
Awesome. Thank you for catching that follow-up question.
Yep.
So again, we don't have any more Q&A. So what I will also do is in that follow-up email, I will include our team's email. That's that invasives@tualatin.swcd.org. So if you do have any follow-up questions, or if you think of anything at the middle of the night tonight, or while you're taking a shower in the morning, feel free. You'll have their contact information. You can always reach out to them or myself, and we're more than happy to provide any recommendations or technical assistance as we can. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And hopefully you can get out there and do some weed wrangling on your own along the way. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Have a